So, this is part two of my conversation with Ian Kennedy. In the first half, we talked about life advice, career goals, and personal development. And in this section, we're going to be talking about his time in the military as a Green Beret.
Do you mind if we move on to some of the military stuff? That would be sick.
Let's go.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we start with what recruiting is like? Because I think there's different ways to enlist, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you enlist, you sign a like first you have to decide what you want to do, and then you have to go into a recruiting station, and they'll try to, the recruiters have a job, which is to fill the jobs that are not full, and so they're going to try to push you to those jobs, and so you have to push back if you want something else. I signed up to do what's called an 18 X-ray program, which is like guaranteed tryout for Special Forces on the enlisted side, and they tried to push me in some other direction, and I fortunately pushed back, and then. For me, after that, you go to basic training, and then you go on to some specialized training for your, whatever job you're going to do. And then for the special forces thing, then there's the tryout for that. It's just a series of tryouts basically. And so like I said, I had a guaranteed tryout when I signed up, finished basic training, airborne school, and then went to the, they called it Special Forces Assessment and Selection. And then after you do that, there's a, 2-year, the length varies depending on your specialty, but 2-year training process before you go to an operational unit.
And then what does the 2-year process entail? Is that just like basic training and then they assign you that role that you initially enlisted for, or how does it work?
So when I enlisted, in the Army, a Special Forces team has 6 different, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, F, 6 different sort of types of people on it. 7, I don't know. I don't feel like counting right now, but when you sign up as just like there's an officer, there's a senior enlisted person, there's a warrant officer, which is some kind of like hybrid enlisted officer person. So that's like the leadership team. And then there's like 10 other guys that are specialists. There's a weapons specialist, an engineering specialist, and engineering mostly means, build structures and then blow them up, demolitions and construction. Then there's the medics. Coolest job in the world is a 18 Delta Special Forces medic. That was not that, but like all the respect for those people. And then the communications person, that was me. That's like operating the radios and, doing the networking, setting the computers up when you go on deployment or whatever. So when you sign up as a, enlistee off the street, you don't get to pick that specialty. Later you'll rank preferences. So, I went through basic training, got to the assessment and selection course. That's like a 3-week, just sufferfest. And then after you pass through that, they'll think about assigning you. You go through the process of like picking a specialty. And by the way, this process like changes constantly. So whatever I'm telling you is like, 15 years old. So I don't know exactly what it looks like now. And then so the actual training course, the 2 years I referred to, it's called the Q course for Special Forces in the Army. It stands for Qualification Course. That entails 6 months of language school, 6 months of specialty training. Was it 6 or I don't know, 3 or 4 months of specialty training. So for me, that was the, the communications piece, survival school, and then, 3 months or so of what they call small unit tactics, which is just all your marksmanship and your tactics. That's the meat of it. And, they would always tell you in the course, they're like, you feel like you're going to finish the course and just be like this fully fledged Green Beret or whatever. But they're like, this is just the beginning. And I was like, oh man, what? Like, I was like, this is kind of hard. But then you finish and you realize that that's the case. It's like, I was in the Army for almost 7 years. So that meant, roughly 3 years of training and 4 years of operational time. And by the time I got out, I felt like I was just beginning. They told me when I showed up to the unit, they're like, you're not going to know how to do your job for 3 years. And then it's time to move on to the next job. And so like, by the time I got out of the Army, I felt like I was finally learning what my job was. So, yeah.
Please keep talking. That's sick.
What part do you want to focus on?
So after the basic training happens for the year, then like this sounds like a fast track to joining the Special Forces. Is everyone in your group planning to do that, or is it segmented?
Basic training like I said, they've done it different ways in the past. I mean, I think in the past there have been, basic training, but there's basically an endless sort of cycle of basic trainings. Like anytime you want to join the Army, there's like a basic training that you can drop into very soon.
Okay.
So it just depends on, timing. Like when is there an opening, and when are you ready to leave. I think in the past there have been like basic training platoons that were composed entirely of special forces enlistees. When I went through, it was not like that. It was mixed. It was all infantry people, all combat people, just infantry. And then after that, you get put into like a cohort of special forces trainees, and then the ones who pass the selection course and go into the Q course. You'll be put into a cohort, and the cohorts are always getting mixed up because people get injured. They like fail a particular phase of the training and have to redo it. They call it getting recycled. And so that, the people you get, yeah. That's why it took me so long to get out of it. Cause I failed the phase or something and had to, wait for, a couple months for the next, the next training cycle to start. And so,
yeah. How often are those training cycles?
I don't remember. I mean, I think they start a new cycle every few months or something. It just depends on the phase of the course.
Like, let's say you get injured midway through one of the recruitments. Can you like enlist in the next session and attempt again?
I mean, you wouldn't. You wouldn't get injured. The recruit. What do you mean by recruitment? I think I'm just
like. I guess
when
you're trying out for the special forces and you're going through that recruitment process.
It depends on what happens. If you fail the assessment, the selection course, then you're done. Like you'll have to wait another year to like apply again and get through. I mean, there are people that have tried the selection like 3 or 4 times. If you get injured, then you might have to wait, a month or 2 to start the next one or until your injury heals. But there are people that got stuck in limbo, man. There are people that just got stuck in that course for years because they got injured. And then like the Army's not great at like keeping track of people all the time. And so like, if you weren't really like advocating to get back in the course, like I remember guys that they'd call it like being on hold. And like, you're just sort of in some like limbo intermediate phase. And there are people that would get stuck in there for like months, like 6 months or something. It was just terrible.
Based on injuries or like not being able to complete certain things.
Yeah. Injuries. I mean, if you fail, a certain part of the course too many times, like they'll drop. I think you get 2 tries. They'll drop you out of the course, okay. And then you can come back later. And there's certainly that happened to people. I luckily made it through the first time.
No big deal. No big deal.
I think most people probably either make it through without failing something or recycle once. But yeah, I mean, when people, despite everyone being like nominally a special forces trainee, there's like certain people that like, start going through the course and like, man, I don't think I really want to do this. Like, this kind of sucks. And so if they get like injured, like they'll milk it, they'll just, kind of hang around hang in the hold for as long as they can. And, some people just, yeah, so it's just different for everybody. Other people are just like chomping at the bit to get back in and try again.
So I'm sure like a lot of people have watched the 2 Weeks of Hell documentary. That refers to a part of the greater training to become
That's the Special Forces assessment and selection. So that's that initial selection. Like if you get through that, then you get the privilege of, entering the full training course.
Oh, so that's like the precursor. Damn. That's not even to like become a Green Beret.
That's just the opportunity to go through the course.
I definitely would never be a Green Beret then. That's insane. So like, yeah, that's insane. Because there's like the STAR is the land navigation, and then you have the obstacle course. I think I could do the obstacle course. That's something I'd be good on. But then what are some other components of the training that I guess are lesser known?
Once again, it's changed. They keep tweaking it to try to optimize the selection process. But the first week was like individual week, basically, where you did some timed ruck marches and runs, and took a battery of psychological tests and like intelligence tests and personality tests and stuff, and then there was a couple of. That's the first week was when you did the obstacle course, and there was something called, what do they call it? There's rifle PT, and then there's something in the pit with the logs. I forget what they called it, but there's this series of like sort of shorter events. And then, honestly, that week was, you're still pushing yourself, but it was like a little slower than the other ones. My selection course was 3 weeks long. So the first course is all that individual stuff. The second week was land nav And you know, that's land nav is it's tough. I mean, you have a really heavy ruck and you're out in the woods and, you know, moving for 12 hours across really difficult terrain and like, you know, trying to find these, you know, points. You know, they give you a grid coordinate and a map and a, you know, a protractor or whatever, a compass and you know, you just got to like land nav the old fashioned way, like no GPS. And it's really good training. You know, I mean, it's really, you know, weeds people out that don't want to do that kind of stuff.
Based on how you've talked, it seems like an outdoorsy person or someone who likes nature can deal with that a lot better. Is that true? Are there a lot of people that come from more rural backgrounds and this is like, this is a piece of cake. I'll be able to get this done, no problem.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think it was a piece of cake for anyone. Like everybody's gonna sort of suffer to one degree or another. I mean, I think it like, you know, how much that suffering bothers you is gonna vary. And I think like the number one factor is it's not like rural or not. Like it might, you know, you might be a little more accustomed to like, you know, prolonged physical discomfort if you grew up as like a farmer or something. But like the number one thing that's versus if you know, you just went to college and, you know, joined a fraternity or whatever. But like the number one thing that you just really got to want it. I mean, I remember when people told me that they're like, you know, if you don't quit, like you know, if you're in good shape and mind you, like, you know, I was around some very fit people in the army, but like nobody would like, there weren't that many like superheroes. You're like, whatever you think the average Green Beret is like, I mean, they're probably different than what you imagine. Just on the average side. I mean, what I mean by that is like what the average Green Beret looks like. There's certainly that's just like total physical specimens that are just like absolute animals. But the average Green Beret is probably much closer to like a normal person than you might think. What differentiates them from other people is just like they won't quit. Just like they want it and you just keep going. And so rural or city folk or whatever, like if people came in, they're like, I'm going to do this and I'm not going to quit no matter what. Those are the people that, unless they got a freak accident, like turned an ankle or something, which happen all the time. Those are the people.
Oh my God. Is it true that they recruit smaller people? Because like, let's say you get injured, it's just easier to carry a small guy out versus someone that's like 300 pounds.
No, I mean, if you're 300 pounds and you can run and ruck and, you know, work as part of a team, like you have just as much of a shot as anyone else. I mean, I think that what you described is certainly true. I mean, like having someone who's really large on your team's a liability, and if they get shot, I mean, and you got to carry them out. But as far as I know, there was never, you know, explicit recruitment of people that were smaller.
Okay. So after the recruitment process begins, what happens after that?
I think we got to be a little more clear on our terminology so I can understand the questions. I mean, what delineates the end of the recruitment process for you? Like, what are you envisioning that as?
Oh, just getting through the selection process.
Okay, so that's the end of recruitment. Okay, so after the selection process, you enter the Q course, the 1 to 2 year like legitimate training course, and that's, you know, I described earlier as the different phases, like the language school.
I see. Okay, that's when all that
small unit tactics, specialty training, marksmanship, all that stuff, survival school stuff like that.
And that you learned Mandarin there. That's how did you learn Mandarin or Spanish?
Zhongwen, Mandarin for those not speaking at home. Yeah, I have a family connection to China. My older brother after college, he actually moved out to San Francisco for the first tech boom, like, you know, post 2000.
Wow. Okay.
And
that's
then,
it.
and then the bubble burst and he got laid off. And so he had studied Chinese in college and he decided to move to China and like, you know, try to do the entrepreneurial thing there and lived there for 8 years. So I spoke, you know, fluent Mandarin and, I got to visit him there once. And so I think when it came time to like select a language that I wanted to study, it was, you know, kind of a obvious choice for me. I mean, it's just like, it was a cool opportunity to, you know, you don't often get to, you know, have you and your siblings all learn Mandarin.
Yeah, that's cool. So that's awesome.
So, I mean, after 6, you know, the language school is 6 months long and it's like, you know, 8 hours a day. And like at the end of every day, you just have a headache from trying to like think in another language. And still, like even after 6 months, your proficiency is not that great. I mean, it's like you can, you know, ask for directions and like order a meal or something, but like it's not, you know, true immersion training. You get to go home and think in another language. And I think if So like the people who really excelled at their language, like, you had to do it in your own time. Like after you finished language school, a lot of people just stop thinking about it. And like you have to take like a test every year to like requalify or something. And like the standard is pretty low for that. So if the people who like really learned the language well, it, had to be kind of an independent process.
So what about some of those other courses, like tactics and stuff like that, or weapons training?
Yeah. So you do, there's like, marksmanship, and it's really no fancier than like, basic training marksmanship. It's just like a little more, you get more ammo and more reps. Any of the sexy, fancy stuff that you might have seen in a movie and you think that like special forces people are doing, we weren't doing. It's just like it's fundamentals. I mean, war is just, it's messy. And so you don't, like the people that you're, if you meet the average Green Beret or Navy SEAL, like what you're imagining those people did, that's what, Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 does. And those are like even more elite than like your normal Navy SEAL or Green Beret. And that requires a whole other, there's different specialty trainings that you can do in the process of being a Green Beret or Navy SEAL, but like that like really elite level stuff that you might see in a movie, that's like, more selective units.
Do you have any opinion on like military movies and action movies?
I think Lone Survivor, I've heard different things about how accurate it, depicts what actually happens, but I think it was a very sort of faithful representation of like what it feels like to be on a special forces team. I mean, just like the way they talk to each other and engage with each other, I think it was really well done.
Oh, really? Okay. Can we talk about your role though in communications? Like, what did that entail?
Sure. Mostly operating the radios. I mean, I don't know. I didn't really know what people meant by radio. Like the only thing I could think of when they were talking about radio, they're like, you're going to operate the radios. I was like, I could just think of like FM, AM on my, I was like, what do you mean radios? What are we doing? And radios are just like your communication devices that, use radio waves, electromagnetic waves to communicate. It's like the same as a cell phone. It's just like, constructed a little bit differently, just same basic principle. So you got to set up the radios and program them, make sure everyone knows how they work. And it's just your job to make sure it's communications. Like, are people able to communicate with each other using technology? And so you got to know how to operate the devices that they give you and maintain them and make sure other people know how to use them. And then there was this, a little bit of like sort of computer networking type stuff. Like when we got into deployment, someone had to set up the computers and make sure that they, they worked and, set up our sort of satellite internet devices and things like that.
Right. I'm getting nervous. Like the conversation's getting more intense. I'm like, nervous asking you these questions. I'm like, is this classified information or so like when you were, the communication device, is this just like a walkie-talkie or like, a flip phone?
It's a very, very expensive walkie-talkie. I mean, it's like they come in different shapes and sizes depending on what capabilities you're looking for. I mean, some communicate with satellites. You ping the satellite and the satellite beams the message back down.
Okay, that's sick.
Some are what they call point to point. It's like if there's a mountain in between you and the person you're trying to talk to, you're not going to be able to talk to them. My favorite radio was, this might be okay. I'm not going to talk about my favorite radio because I think it might be classified. But.
So like, yeah. So like, how far can the communication go? Like if you're in like a mountainous area, can it transmit through the mountains or?
No. I mean, a signal can't pass through the mountains. If you're, that's in Lone Survivor. A major plot point is the fact that their radios fail because the mountains are in the way. They're trying to communicate with a satellite. A satellite is just like it's the same principle as a cell phone. Like you're not directly calling the person's cell phone. You're pinging the cell tower, and then the cell tower sends the signal through, some wires or whatever, and then it comes up the other cell tower and then pings the other cell phone. So for satellite communications, you ping the satellite up in space, and then the satellite pings it back down to the receiver. And then, for most like, intra team within the team communication, it's just point to point, which means that you have to have a direct line of sight from your antenna to their antenna. And so if there's a mountain in the way, or if there's too much in the way, but if like across open desert or something, that signal can go for like miles.
Oh, really? Okay. So you can be like super far behind and just like communicating what you see or what's around your area, like stuff like that.
A lot of just like it. It's kind of funny that
it sounds like you're a lookout guy as well. Is that true? Is that a good characterization?
No, anybody who's everyone on the team is equipped with a radio. and like you can assign someone to go be a lookout. I mean, it's something you can ask someone to do, and like it's a useful thing to do to have a lookout.
That's a
I mean, there's
stressful
all
job. It's like if you're in the
being
middle
the
of like
lookout.
commotion, you're like, shit, I need someone to go like flank this guy out. And then like we gotta get like a sniper on the roof or something. Does that happen? Or is that like movie talk again?
Those certainly, seem like plausible military scenarios. I mean, like I think I told you this. Like despite having been a Green Beret for, 3 or 4 years, I was never in, combat as you imagined it. The closest I came to combat was calling down airstrikes on targets through drone feeds, and that was, part of my job and some specialized training I received. But that was never in like, house to house fighting or, open combat the way you may be imagining it. So a lot of what I know about, combat as it actually is just, what I've heard from, friends and
But
colleagues.
still, it's not like you're in that situation relaxing. Like you're in the moment, like almost waiting for combat. You're like, okay, like is this gonna go south? Is this gonna get bad, or what's gonna happen?
No, I mean, like, yeah, not in my. This is hard for some people to understand. I mean, like, depending on the time of the war and, when you get deployed and where you get deployed, like, you might not see any direct combat or even, really feel like. I mean, the closest I came to it was when I was in Iraq in 2014, and we were on like a, pretty well protected base, and we only left the base in some very controlled situations. And so I never really felt like an imminent threat to my life. I mean, the closest I came to my life being threatened was like during parachute training. I got like tangled up in some power lines once, and thankfully they were shut down.
You have to.
That could have been
You
zapped.
have to tell that story. What happened?
I mean, honestly, I don't really remember. I mean, it's like we were, so my team the teams in Special Forces are sort of organized by specialty. There was a sort of a mountain team, a dive team, like scuba, like what they call a mobility team that would like ride around on quads, and we were on the free fall team, like free fall parachuting. And so that, involved a lot of parachute training. Just once again, for the listeners at home, like this doesn't really I think there was like one active combat parachute jump during the entire war on terror. It's not something that happens very often. So, the movies there, there's this movie, Lone Survivor, not Lone Survivor. What is it? What was it called? It was like this movie where the actors were actual Navy SEALs, and like you could tell because they were not very good actors, but they just repeatedly are jumping out of planes onto objectives, and I don't think that happens very often in reality, unless I'm like missing something. But anyway, we did a lot of parachute training, and a lot of that training happens at night, so you're doing it under night vision goggles, and you have a very heavy rucksack strapped between your legs, and parachute, free fall training with like, your 12 other guys. It's like very chaotic. I mean, it's like really hard to, once again, it's just like doing the fundamentals, the basics, like executing all that over and over again. It's not like fancy stuff. But we jumped out at night, and I think I got a little turned around, like because you have to sort of navigate in the air. You have to like know what the landmarks are, and you might have some devices that help you navigate. And
you got your night vision on jumping out of a plane. That's pretty sick.
Well, the night vision's up when you jump, because
okay,
you don't want to get it tangled up in the parachute. But then once you stabilize, once your chute opens, you put it down, and then you start navigating. But yeah, so I'm a little turned around, and I'm coming before every jump. You have a plan about where people are going to try to land and in what order and whatever. And got turned around and was headed straight for some power lines, and my parachute got tangled up in them, and I was going for them. I was like, this might be it. But thank goodness they were shut off, and the power lines were crisscrossed all over the drop zone. I'm not, so very fortunate that someone had the foresight to turn them off.
So where is all this training being done? Like, is it just at your base, or are you like doing this throughout the U.S. or abroad?
Mostly throughout the U.S. I mean, I was stationed in Washington, where it's like constantly cloudy. So I only did a handful of jumps in Washington. Like the clouds, if it's too cloudy, you can't jump because you can't see where you're going. And so I only did a handful of jumps actually in Washington. But once a year, we'd go do a sort of an extended training in Arizona, where there's, clear skies and warm weather all the time. So yeah, that's where most of my jumps were in Arizona. But I also did a handful of jumps in other countries.
Okay.
with partner forces.
So while you're in the military, do you get the chance to interact with other people in the military, like different divisions, Air Force, Navy, stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the, mostly you train with other Army folks like within your unit. I mean, the vast majority of my training was with other Green Berets and just specifically the 12 guys on my team. Occasionally, you'll get sent off to schools. They're called schools where you learn a specialized skill. That's where I learned my airstrike controller skills. And in that particular course, there's, folks from the Navy and the Air Force and, Marine Corps and whatever. So you get to, often from other special operations units, SEALs and Marine Raiders and stuff. But then you'll also get stuck in situations that are like totally inter-service. I mean, when I was in Iraq during the, controlling the airstrikes, we were in like a little building that, had a sort of a just hodgepodge team of, folks from all over the military, like Marines and Navy and Air Force, all doing different jobs to sort of like enable this. And, that was really fun. It was really cool to like, trade notes and talk about how it was different, what they were doing over there and meet people that were doing it different jobs. So that was pretty cool. I mean, everyone's experience in the military is so different. Like you'll have people that do a ton of, inter-service work and other people that probably like will never interact with, people from another service in a professional capacity. It just depends.
Do you know how many people are in the military? Do you know that?
Oh, dude, I don't know, man. I think DOD was like up to like 1 million at some point,
crazy.
But
yeah,
I think they've downsized a lot. That might be a, exaggeration by, 2x or something, but
still,
it was a lot, but I think it's downsized a lot.
What are Americans' opinions on Canada's military?
I don't know. No one's really thinking about it very much, I don't think. I mean, I think there's like, there's certain nations that are, known to have, I mean, my experience is like vastly biased towards special operations. I mean, I think like, the UK and has a very competent special operations community from what I understand, and Australia. And, I don't know. I don't think I ever met a Canadian
or anything like that.
No, we're too busy trash talking about the Navy SEALs to bother about Canada too much.
Fair enough. So while you were deployed, what is it like being deployed? Like, how often are you on the clock? Like, can you explore the city? Like, what are kind of the rules in place when you're doing that stuff?
Depends. I mean, if you're in a little outpost in, the middle of a valley in Afghanistan, there's not going to be much exploring going on. Like you really risk your life. I mean, this is the whole Bo Bergdahl thing. He wandered off a little outpost and got kidnapped, by the Taliban.
Wait, what? Can you say that story again?
Bo Bergdahl was a American soldier that sort of wandered off his, I don't remember exactly what kind of, there's different sizes of bases when you're in a war. There's like the massive ones, and then there's these little tiny outposts. And I don't know, where on that spectrum he was. I think it was a smaller outpost, and he wandered off and got kidnapped by the Taliban. And I honestly, I don't remember, what ended up happening with him, whether they found him or not. But yeah, short answer, like, no, I mean, you can't. I mean,
that's crazy. That's crazy, dude. You wander off your base and you get kidnapped. That's crazy.
You're not supposed to wander off your base. I mean, it's a dangerous place. It's not. I mean, I think, if I want to zoom out and be philosophical, I think one of the aspects of life that we take most for granted is just peace. As much as we like to complain about how bad things are and how our, country's falling apart or whatever, like all of us, most of us in the United States have grown up in a remarkably peaceful time, unless you maybe live in the inner cities or something where there's a ton of violent crime. Yeah, that's not the way it is in a lot of the world. You can't just go wherever you want,
Yeah, that's true.
Assume that people are going to protect you. And so like as a person in the military, you got to make sure you stay safe as much as you can. And so, yeah, you can't just go do whatever you want. I mean, when I was in Iraq, for example, I was, like on a, fairly large base, and yeah, we had, like, you're always kind of on the clock. If there's something you got to do, you got to go do it. But it's like, I wasn't, sometimes you're just, the military is kind of like an extreme, like there's very intense action, and then there's a lot of boredom, like everybody, like you're watching movies, or you're just like, kind of waiting to, it just depends. It depends on what's happening. And then when we were, we also did training missions in, other countries where we were, friendly with the other country, Thailand, South Korea, Philippines.
Right.
And,
okay.
And then you get, if generally the teams I was on, everyone got like a week to go travel, go see what was up.
Got it.
That was a very different situation. You're not like in an active war.
Okay, so when you're in, I mean, that makes sense now that you describe it that way. When you're in friendly countries, you can basically kind of walk around, do your thing, but probably not the best to do it in like Iraq or Afghanistan. So
no, I mean, you'll get what, I mean, here's another movie moment worth pointing out. I think in The Hurt Locker, this like EOD, this bomb diffuser guy, like jumps the wall of the base and goes into town to like, find some person that and it's just like completely ridiculous. It's just like not something that would ever happen. No, no. And like I remember like the guard in the tower or whatever was like, "Hey man, like, why are you out there? Where are you coming from?" He's like, "Oh, I don't know. I just went to get some air or something." And it's just whenever.
It's never occur.
Extreme security. Yeah, I don't remember exactly what happens in the movie, but it's something like that.
So what are these bases like? Do you guys have like, do you have TVs? Like, can you watch like the Super Bowl and stuff? What does it look like in one of those things?
Yeah, my answer to everything is going to be, it depends. A lot of sort of temporary structures, concrete and, cinder blocks and whatever, the big bases got pretty built up. I mean, like the big bases in like Afghanistan, Iraq at the height of the war had like Burger Kings on them.
Holy
right?
shit. Really?
Like,
oh dude.
Yeah. I mean, so you could say you got deployed to Iraq and like, you got to watch TV every day and eat Burger King. And, if you're at some tiny, like sort of outpost that you had to build in the middle of Afghanistan, like you don't have anything, you might have some like, crappy satellite internet. So you can like occasionally write an email home, but you're not watching the Super Bowl. But we watched, my team, when we were in Iraq, we watched the Super Bowl, and on New Year's we watched a movie together. Like there were, facilities to do that.
No, but that's something you mentioned to me as well. Like when I brought up, like the Bronze Star that you won, you're like, yeah, like you described it as an award you can win in the military, which I thought was like a very humble way to describe it. But as you point out, like there's people who are in, a lot tougher situations, and it's important to like remember those people as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think I won some awards, I did some good work, whatever you want to call it. But, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, a lot of my teammates had been in real combat. And a lot of, I think that I said this to you the first time we chatted, like to the external observer, if you're like, that guy was a Green Beret and this person was an infantry person in the, 82nd Airborne Division, they'd be like, oh, the Green Berets were elite or whatever. But like, there are guys that were in the 82nd Airborne that have been in, combat for, 10 straight years and are just like absolute animals. And so, the title is just, I went through a longer training process, but that doesn't mean that I'm better than, some infantry guy in the 82nd Airborne in any dimension. He might be stronger than me, faster than me, have more combat experience, be a better leader. Like it just, it doesn't guarantee that you're, the best of the best or anything. It's just a title. And the other thing is like, just thinking about, so that's kind of like in the current time, like there's just huge variability in like what kinds of experiences you have in different jobs, but also like over time. I memean, man, like, wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, pretty rough, but it's not World War II. It's not Vietnam. Those guys are the, I think all of us is the, the Green Berets, like the guys that we really thought were like total badasses were like the Vietnam era, the Green Berets. They just had so much more. It was just more intense. I mean, there's so many, restrictions on what you do and whatever. And there's, obviously people were in like a ton of combat in the wars and terror, but it wasn't, some of the stories that we've heard from the Vietnam guys, you're just like, oh man, that was like, those guys are on another level.
Did you ever get the chance to meet like elders in the military, people that were previously Green Berets or like other kinds of special forces? Is that ever a thing that the military does?
Yeah. I think the nice thing about having served in the military is like whenever you meet someone else in the military, as long as, if I meet like someone who was a cook in the Air Force, we're not necessarily going to have a lot to talk about. Like we might have overlapped at a certain base or something, but certainly people in like the same community. Like if you were like a submarine guy or like a surface warfare Navy guy or a special operations guy or a pilot, like you meet another pilot or special operations guy and like there's a sort of like an instant rapport.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
That's really cool. Like some of my, best friends, military friends, are people I met in graduate school, and they were in different services. But also special operations guys, and so obviously we had a lot to talk about, and that's really cool. But sorry, what was old timers? Yeah, a couple times in the training course, they had some old Vietnam guys come talk to us. It was really cool. I mean, like I said, you're just kind of blown away at what they actually experienced. Kind of like a funny. I mean, I think this just points to the variability in all of this. Like, I remember 2 older Vietnam guys coming to talk to us, and one guy was like, "Guys, let me just tell you one thing. Like, if you ever get captured, don't say a word. Just never talk." And we're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, it sounds intense." And then like the other guy comes in, he's like, let me tell you guys one thing. Like, if you get captured, just say whatever you need to say. Just tell them, like, just survive. And so it's like, I don't know, man. Like, it's like anything else. There's different, people have different ideas. I think this is, and I'm going to zoom out and be philosophical again, because I can't help but do that. That's just what I do. Like, something is called something. You're in the military, you were a Green Beret, and we have some like monolithic vision of what that is. Every Green Beret conforms to this archetype and believes these things or whatever. And there's just, within every organization, there's so much variability in what people think, how mission oriented they are, how hard they work. I mean, at every level. So I'm a pretty big fan of the NBA, and, I was watching, I think it was the Mind the Game podcast with JJ Redick and LeBron. And they're talking about how, like, so you get the NBA, which is the 400 best players in the world at basketball, and there's just a huge gap between the people that become LeBron James or Jason Tatum and work that hard, and the people that wash out after 2 years. It's like certain people just stop working hard. They don't want to like keep growing. And they were talking about how the biggest thing that differentiates NBA players is just like how hard they work, how dedicated they are. And you think you're in the NBA, you're a professional athlete, that must be your whole life. It's like, no, there's variability. And it's the same in the military and special operations and anything else. It's like, people, so for some people it's just a job, for some people it's a calling, for some people it's like a, way station and like
Right.
where they're going in life. Like that was how I would describe it. Like it was a stop, and, it was really important to me, but it was never like, this is who I am. But there were certain people that are like, yeah, they are a Green Beret. That's who they are. They are a basketball.
You've talked about that though. Like, after doing something for a while, regardless of what it is, it will feel normal to you. And one of the biggest challenges is sort of reinventing your interest in that subject again and making it feel fresh and new.
Let me think about that. That is certainly true. And in any field where you want to become a master, like, you have to, keep learning. There's no, like in jujitsu, they say, like, you really start learning jujitsu and you become a black belt. Like in Zen, they say, like, you really start learning what Zen is about when you, like, leave the monastery and like finish your training. Like, it's just, that's the way it is. And like, and to get back to what I was talking about earlier, like, if you don't have that like love of the thing, that like just like pure interest and excitement, you'll never reach that level. It's just like, you won't have anything to propel you there. Like LeBron James has something that I don't have and you don't have. And that's just a fact of nature. Like he loves basketball more than all of us. And that's why he's LeBron James. But certainly, I mean, what you're saying about things become normal, like, that's just the way it is. I mean, an NBA player doesn't walk around thinking like, oh man, I'm the man because I'm in the NBA. He's like stressed about, will I win MVP this year, or will it be Giannis?
Right.
It's like, I'm stressed about that. Like, are we going to make the playoffs? Like, they're not resting on if they're happy to just be in the NBA, they're not going to be one of the guys. And it's like the same in the military. If you're just like, I kind of think I had that illusion. I was like, once you make it through the training course, you're going to be a Green Beret and you're going to be there. And it's like not the case at all. You just got to keep the thing that they're testing for is like, are you going to keep pushing? And so if you think that at the end of the test that you don't have to do that anymore, like, you're sorely mistaken. You will have to continue pushing and improving and whatever, if you want to sort of like reach the top of your field. But the other aspect that you're sort of referring to there is just like things become normal. It's like, when I say something about my radio or like, jumping or whatever, I can recall those memories. But the idea that there's anything out of the ordinary about it just like doesn't cross my mind. And like, it's just like what I did. I was immersed in it. Everyone around me was doing it. That was the world that I saw. And it's like, it's the same for, our childhood experiences. Like for, folks who've had adverse childhood experiences, grow up in like violent communities or with like parents who like have drug addictions or, abuse or whatever, like that is normal. And that's why the behavior gets passed on, because it's like, that's what you've observed as like the way of doing things. And it's only with, this is where that inner work becomes really important. It's only with like the benefit of like hindsight and talking to other people about their experiences that you can get some appreciation for the fact that what you experienced was unique in some way or was different. And yet at the same time, the emotional tenor of that recognition is not there. Like I cannot help but look back on my time as a Green Beret and be like, it was all very normal, because that's how it seemed at the time. I was just hanging out with other Green Berets, and like, it's a fact of life that makes it, sometimes difficult to understand other people. Like to go back to the wealth thing, we can look at somebody who has like a ton of wealth and be like, well, if I had that much money, I'd just make myself happy. Like what's there to do? But that's from an outsider perspective. You don't know what it entails to get that wealthy, and you don't want to know what the life of a very wealthy person looks like. And so you really have no idea whether or not you would be happy. This is something I get, stuck on with clients sometimes, like, or just other people I've coached. They're like, sometimes I pose this question. I'm like, would you rather be happy or great? And like, but usually it's men, but often they'll be like, I'd rather be great. And I'm like, doesn't that sound kind of strange? That like, ultimately all we want is happiness, but you think that this greatness thing is even better than happiness. It's because to use a topical example, Elon Musk, sometimes people are like, how could Elon do this or that? Like, why is he so crazy? Why can't he just be a normal person? It's like, bruh, the dude built 3 like world changing companies. That guy's not normal. He's never been normal. He's not wired the way you and I are. There's no, like, you cannot expect Elon Musk to be a normal person. He is what he is. And this is not an excuse for his behavior or like a justification for anything. That's just the way it is. Until you've been there and seen it, you don't know what it is. I'm sensing a recurring theme in our conversation. This is like, and this is one of them. Until you've been there, you don't know what it is. And like any idea of thinking you know what it is going to be mistaken, and your misconceptions will be corrected.
But I guess I think the fascination is justified to a certain extent. Like, you must understand that people are fascinated with the work that you've done because it's so uncommon.
Yeah, I mean, it still happens sometimes where people like I'm not like trying to keep it a secret or something, but sometimes I just won't lead with that because it's not relevant. And then when people find out, they're like, "Why didn't you tell me that?" I'm like, "I don't know, man. I just didn't think of it. Like we weren't talking about it." It's like I'm sure there are lots of things that you're not telling me about yourself. But I think the one thing that I really have noticed, and this is a broader point too, is like the thing that can be both frustrating and as amusing is like when people insist that their idea of what being a Green Beret is more accurate than yours, and you're like, dude, I'm telling you, I was there, and they're like, nah, man, you're just being humble or something. You're like, yeah, I know what it is. I'm like, no, you don't, because you didn't do it. And it's like. So, people, we like, we get an idea of what something is, and we build up a worldview around it, and we're like emotionally invested in that, view, and we want to cling to it. And I mean, to your point earlier, like I recognize, like I've probably been at fault sometimes about being a little too flippant about what I've done. And like, I honestly, in the last couple of years, 3 years, I'd say I've like developed a renewed appreciation for what I did when I was in the military. And like, I think when I got out, I was ready to be out and go do something different. Now I really look back on it with some fondness, even though it was like challenging for me at the time, not like psychologically challenging. Just I felt like there were other things I wanted to be doing. But, and there, there's a sense now that, I kind of wish I could, go back and do it again with a better attitude of really like, because my expectations were being shattered, daily of like what I thought it was going to be. And if I could go back and just with that acceptance of like, whatever it ends up being, that's what it is. And like, that's good enough. Like, I would have been happier and, felt better about it. Right. And like, and that's one of those mindset, tricks or reframing tactics that's really useful. It's like, you really got to be careful about expectations. Like, whatever you show up and see, that's what it is. And if it is contrary to your expectations are wrong. And like, reality is smacking you in the face, and, be open to it.
Do you find you've gotten better with that? Because in some way, like it's sure. Nice to fantasize about what it could be. And then unfortunately you still get disappointed.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've had the opposite experience. I don't I like to fantasize in very, I have some like creative projects that I'm kind of like noodling with, and like I like to fantasize about that. Like, what could this world be that I'm inventing? But in terms of like, I really try to like apply all of the lessons about sort of the commonalities between. I've been as like, I think one of the things that's unique about me is I've been in some very different environments. Like I grew up in this sort of like house where I struggled with, family mental illness. That gave me one perspective on the world. And then in college, I was just kind of like a frat bro. And that was like one perspective on the world. That's a weird one to look back on. And then, there's the military me. And then there was the me that's like kind of engaged in like hardcore academics, like physics and stuff. And then there's the me that's been in venture capital. And then there's the me now that like really feels like me, where I'm like, I just do the things that I like doing and I kind of build my own world. And so I don't need to worry about my expectations because I get to dictate what life is. But I think by like going through each of those phases and like, I mean, the fraternity example is a good one. I thought, the cool frat bros were going to be a certain way, and they turned out to be different than I expected. And that was kind of a wake up call. And then, I continued to make that mistake and I guess the last world I didn't mention was like spiritual communities like Zen. And, once again, I think that was the last time in my life where my sort of expectations or illusions were shattered. I mean, it's like, and it was very liberating. I think with that last one, like I had some idea about what it meant to live in a monastery in Japan, and my Zen teacher disabused me of those notions. And the reality of it was very different than what I expected. And it was very liberating. I was like, I'm not going to make this mistake anymore. And far from that making the world less interesting, it actually has made the world much more interesting and magical to me. Because when you really open up to what things actually are, you don't have to worry about this. I mean, it's good to, I think that what you were alluding to earlier, like it's good to have myths and heroes, and it's inevitable that we'll, map our own understanding of what these people should be, that will sort of try to come up with a story of what these people should be. And it can be really disappointing when it turns out to be different. So it's a natural thing, but I don't think it's necessarily one that you need to have. Like, I don't think there's any requirement to be happy that you have, fantastical ideas about, what the world is like. I find the opposite much more reassuring. The world makes a lot more sense to me. And that's really nice.
Let's end on this question. How do you feel veterans are treated in the United States?
I think generally, I think it's a lot better. From what I understand, it's a lot better than it used to be. I mean, this really broad strokes, like, World War II came back and they were treated like heroes. And then, Vietnam was very terrible, very bad being a Vietnam vet. I mean, you came back and people were like, yelling at you and spitting on you and stuff. And regardless of how honorable your service might have been. And I think there's been attempts to rehabilitate that. And I think there's, everybody knows to say thank you for your service. And at the same time, I think there's certain recurring trend. Once again, there's certain ideas about, what veterans are that are not necessarily helpful to the veteran community. I mean, like, veterans are just people, they're not superheroes. They're, a lot of them have done incredibly courageous things, and, and that should be, praised and respected, but, it doesn't give you some, unique insight into the world. I mean, there are people who are like, I'm a Navy SEAL and therefore listen to my opinion about geopolitics or like, domestic politics or spirituality or something. It's like, just because you did the Navy SEAL thing doesn't mean you have any special insight into these other areas of life. You might have some by nature of what you've done, but if you're really going to be an expert in those things, you need to like, have more experience. And so I think like it's a tough line to, it's really a tough line to walk. I mean, you have to pay respect where it's due, but you also can't set up. I mean, I think, the idea that, all veterans are, a certain way, like heroes or this or that, is actually a disservice to a lot of them, because they get out and they expect to be treated a certain way. But, they realize that, at the end of the day, if they don't have, skills and abilities that are like, useful in the civilian world, they're not going to get any special attention. It's like the fact of having served is not, a qualifier for, whatever job you want or whatever. So I'm kind of rambling. I don't have, if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, I probably would have a more cogent explanation, because people have asked me this question before, but I think there's just a tension, between this, like, paying respect where it's due and like, and not not mythologizing too much what it is. I think generally the best way to approach life is just to be as clear about, what reality is as you can. And, the more you stray from that, the more, more problems it will cause. And I think there's certainly an aspect of that in the way we, think about and treat veterans.
That's a good point, though. Like, not over pedestalizing them and giving them this false expectation that their life's going to be amazing once they get out. Because that can be like really stressful for someone that's actually been in combat and then they're expecting this like, trophy and just doesn't come.
Yeah, it can be a really hard transition. I mean, even for people who do everything right and like, we're a great, soldier or whatever, like those skills don't necessarily transfer over into other areas. Like being in the military is just different than like holding a job at a business. And like, certainly there are transferable skills, but it's not 100% transferable. You will need to learn new things and change your attitude and mentality. And like the people that struggle are the ones that can't do that. And the people that succeed are the ones that adapt. And often that's a delayed process. I mean, I think like when I talk to friends now, it's like we kind of realize that, that adjustment was a little harder than we had expected or thought, even for people that are, I went into the military with a college degree already and I was like ready to get out and like, had an idea about how the world of work operated and what it took to get a job and succeed. And still was difficult for me. In ways that I didn't expect. But sorry, there's something I really wanted to say about this. So give me a second.
Yeah, no worries. All good.
Summon it back up. Okay. So what I'll say about it is anytime you give a group preferential treatment, like there will be attempts on both sides to game the system. I mean, like if you do preferential hiring for veterans, people will play up their military service to get a job. And, that's not always useful. And then like, on the other side, like companies will, when I got out of the Army, I did a veterans integration program at Goldman Sachs. So it's sort of like a short internship for veterans getting out and, Goldman Sachs was going to help them transition. The ugly secret of the whole thing was like most of those people had gone to Harvard or Princeton or Yale or like, I had gone to Cornell and like it was kind of weird being in this. They're like, oh, we're really helping veterans out. We're going to get you guys on track. I'm like, none of us need any. There was like one or two people in the group that really, were benefiting from it. And, most of the people ended up going to business school, like not working at Goldman Sachs. And like that kind of left a weird taste in my mouth. I mean, I think like it's all well and good to pat yourself on the back and say we hired all these veterans, but there's like if they also went to Harvard, it's like what are you're not really helping the veteran community. It's like I think the people that are most poised to succeed after the military already had a lot going for them, and so there's not necessarily enough attention to the people that like are going to have that rougher transition. It's just a harder population to work with. It's like would be harder to integrate them into a business if they didn't have that those skills already. So it's tricky. It's like you want to reward people for hard work and honor their achievements and stuff, but it's, never clear cut the best way to do that, I'd say.
Is there anything you wanted to mention before ending the episode?
Let's see. If you found what I said interesting and you're interested in career coaching, you can reach out. My email address is ian@truenature.coach. And I'm taking on new clients. And the way I talked in this episode is probably a good indicator of the way I show up in coaching. With clients, I talk a lot less because I'm not, the one being interviewed, but certainly the way I, approach problems and try to think about things is the same. And that's probably it for now, but I appreciate you, inviting me back on and having another conversation.